The heat hit Tyler Harrison like a physical wall the moment he stepped off the transport shuttle. Even through his regulation survival suit, he could feel Zarathan 7's twin suns bearing down on the landing platform. The desert stretched before him in endless waves of rust-colored sand, broken only by scattered rock formations and strange, massive plants that looked like enormous barrels sprouting from the ground. Around him, cadets from 17 different worlds filed out of their respective transports. The Kryn clicked their mandibles together, their thick exoskeleton armor gleaming in the harsh sunlight. They looked like walking tanks, each one standing nearly 3 meters tall with shells that could probably stop a plasma round. The Velperi floated past on their anti-gravity cushions, their bodies already sealed tight against the environment. Tyler had seen them close every opening on their bodies during atmospheric entry. No sand would get inside those living fortresses. The Thanax were perhaps the most confident of all. Their species had evolved on a world of endless underground caverns, and their shovel-like claws could dig through solid rock. Here on Zarathan 7, the loose sand would be like swimming through water for them. They chattered among themselves in their clicking language, clearly discussing how easy this trial would be. Tyler pulled his field kit closer and walked toward the assembly point. He was the only human in this group of 47 cadets. Earth had only recently joined the Galactic Survival Academy, and they were still proving themselves worthy of a place among the elder species. No pressure, he thought grimly. The assembly hall was a prefabricated dome, its walls humming with climate control systems. Inside, the temperature dropped to something almost comfortable. Cadets found seats according to their species groups, except for Tyler, who sat alone in the back row. He did not mind. It gave him a better view of the briefing screens. Instructor Vrel entered through the main doors, and the room fell silent immediately. The Saurine stood over 2.5 meters tall, his emerald scales catching the overhead lights. His vertical pupils swept across the assembled cadets with the cold assessment of a predator evaluating prey. Tyler had learned that Vrel's species came from a world of active volcanoes and toxic gas vents. They considered most other environments laughably easy. "Welcome to the Sandstorm trial," Vrel began, his voice carrying a strange rasp like stones grinding together. "For the next 72 hours, you will survive in the Zarathan Desert during peak storm season. This is not a team exercise. This is not a simulation. The storms are real. The danger is real. Failure means rescue and automatic dismissal from the academy." The screens behind him flickered to life, showing swirling walls of sand moving across the desert like living things. The storms were massive, some reaching heights of over 1,000 meters. Wind speeds could exceed 200 kilometers per hour during peak intensity. "You will each carry a standard survival kit," Vrel continued, pacing before the assembly. "Emergency rations, water for 3 days, basic medical supplies, a knife, thermal blanket and one emergency beacon. Use the beacon and you fail. Die and you also fail, though that is generally considered the worst outcome." A few nervous laughs rippled through the Velperi section. The Kryn remained silent, confident in their natural armor. "The desert offers no shelter," Vrel said, his tail swishing behind him. "No caves, no overhangs, no protection. You must create your own survival solution. How you do this will determine whether you pass or fail." He tapped a claw on the podium. "Based on historical data, half of you will signal for rescue within 12 hours. Another quarter will follow by the end of day 2. Very few ever complete the full 72 hours. Tyler studied the terrain maps on his datapad while Vrel continued the briefing. The desert was remarkably flat, with only gentle rolling dunes and those strange barrel-shaped plants scattered across the landscape. He zoomed in on one of the plants. According to the datapad, they were called Zarathan succulents, native species that had evolved over millions of years to survive the brutal environment. They could grow up to 4 meters tall and 2 meters wide, their thick waxy skin protecting the water-rich pulp inside. Something about them seemed familiar to Tyler. He had grown up in Arizona in the Sonoran Desert back on Earth. His grandmother had taught him to respect the desert, to understand it rather than fight against it. She had shown him how the native plants had solved every problem the desert could throw at them. "Cadets will deploy in 10 minutes, Vrel announced. "You will spread out across a 50-kilometer zone. Remain in visual or scanner range of another cadet and you will be disqualified for collaboration. Your trial begins the moment you leave this dome." Around him, cadets began checking their equipment. The Kryn tested the seals on their water containers. The Thanax flexed their digging claws, planning their underground bunkers. The Velperi configured their portable dome generators, tiny devices that could create force field shelters. Tyler Harrison simply looked at the images of the barrel cacti on his screen. He enlarged the cross-section diagram, studying the internal structure. The plant's thick outer skin, sometimes 10 centimeters or more, protected against sand abrasion and temperature extremes. The fibrous interior provided structural support while remaining flexible enough to sway in high winds rather than breaking. The water-storing pulp made up the bulk of the plant's mass. A crane named Thorax clacked over to Tyler's seat. "Human, you seem unconcerned. Do you have some special Earth technology for desert survival?" Tyler looked up at the armored alien. "No special technology. Just observation." "Observation?" Thorax's mandibles clicked in what might have been laughter. "The Kryn have survived on fortress worlds for 10,000 years. Our shells can withstand impacts that would crush lesser species. What can observation do against a sandstorm?" "I guess we will find out," Tyler said quietly. The deployment alarm sounded, a long wailing tone that echoed through the dome. Cadets filed toward the exit airlocks, each one assigned to a different transport that would drop them at their starting positions. Tyler slung his survival kit over his shoulder and joined the line. Outside, the heat returned with even greater intensity. The wind had picked up, carrying streams of fine sand that hissed against his suit. In the distance, he could see the first signs of the approaching storm system, a dark line on the horizon that seemed to swallow the sky. Tyler's transport was a simple hover platform, automated and programmed with his drop coordinates. He climbed aboard and watched as the other cadets dispersed in different directions, each one heading toward their chosen survival strategy. The platform carried him 15 kilometers into the desert before settling near a cluster of the massive barrel cacti. Tyler jumped down, his boots sinking slightly into the loose sand. The platform immediately lifted off, leaving him alone in the vast emptiness. He walked toward the largest cactus he could see, a massive specimen nearly 4 meters tall. Its surface was covered in long, sharp spines, and its waxy green skin seemed to shimmer in the heat. Tyler pulled out his knife and stood before the plant, remembering his grandmother's words from long ago. "The desert does not fight against the desert," she had told him. "It becomes part of it." Above him, the sky was beginning to darken. The first sandstorm was coming. Tyler stood before the massive cactus, studying its surface carefully. The spines were longer than his fingers, arranged in vertical rows along the plant's ridged exterior. He pulled out his standard-issue survival knife and tested the waxy skin. The blade bit into it with some resistance, but it was cuttable. He began working methodically, cutting a rectangular outline on the side facing away from the wind. The cactus skin was thick, nearly 10 centimeters in some places, and the work was slow. Green pulp oozed from the cuts, sticky and cool to the touch. Tyler worked carefully, remembering how his grandmother had shown him similar techniques with barrel cacti back in Arizona, though never on this scale. After 30 minutes of careful cutting, he had created an opening large enough to crawl through. Inside, the cactus was filled with fibrous pulp and moisture. Tyler began scooping it out with his hands, creating a hollow space in the center of the plant. The work was messy, and his gloves quickly became covered in the sticky green substance, but he continued steadily. Meanwhile, across the desert, other cadets were implementing their own survival strategies. The Kryn had immediately begun digging, their powerful claws throwing up huge sprays of sand as they excavated bunkers. They worked in teams of 3, creating deep pits that they planned to roof over with their emergency thermal blankets weighted down with sand. Thorax, the Kryn who had spoken to Tyler earlier, stood at the bottom of a pit already 2 meters deep. "Excellent progress," he called to his companions. "At this depth, the sandstorm will pass harmlessly overhead. We will simply wait it out in comfort." The Velperi had activated their portable dome generators, creating shimmering force fields that arced over shallow depressions they had scooped in the sand. Inside these protected bubbles, they arranged their supplies and settled in to wait. The domes hummed quietly, their generators drawing power from solar cells that would recharge during the day. The Thanax had disappeared entirely, burrowing deep underground where the storms could not reach them. Their tunnels extended 5 meters down, with multiple chambers for sleeping and storage. They were perhaps the most confident of all the species, certain that their natural advantages made this trial almost trivially easy. Back at his cactus, Tyler had created a hollow space large enough to fit himself and his supplies. The interior walls were still thick enough to provide insulation and protection. He crawled inside, pulling his survival kit behind him, and used some of the removed pulp to plug the entrance, leaving only a small gap for air circulation. Inside the cactus, the temperature was noticeably cooler than outside. The thick walls blocked the worst of the heat, and the moisture in the remaining pulp seemed to help regulate the internal environment. Tyler settled into his unusual shelter and checked his chronometer. 2 hours had passed since deployment. The storm would arrive soon. The monitoring station, located in an armored facility 50 kilometers from the trial zone, showed 47 biosignatures spread across the desert. Instructor Vrel stood before the main display screen, his arms crossed behind his back. Other instructors from various species crowded around, watching their cadets' preparations. "The Kryn have good depth," observed a Thanex instructor. "Their bunkers should hold." "The Velperi domes are rated for winds up to 300 kilometers per hour," added another. "They will be perfectly safe." Vrel said nothing, his eyes scanning the display. One signature puzzled him. The human had barely moved in the past hour, and his thermal signature was partially obscured by something organic. "What is the human doing?" he asked. A technician zoomed in on Tyler's location. "Sir, it appears he has entered one of the native plants. A Zarathan succulent." Several instructors turned to look at the screen. "He is hiding inside a plant?" one of them asked, mandibles clicking with amusement. "During a sandstorm?" "Humans are a new species to the Academy," another said. "Perhaps they do not understand the severity of desert storms." The first warning sirens began to sound across the desert. The storm was 15 minutes out. Through their communicators, cadets could hear the automated warnings. Wind speeds would exceed 200 kilometers per hour. Visibility would drop to 0. The storm would last approximately 6 hours. Tyler heard the warnings inside his cactus shelter. He wedged himself more securely into the hollow space and checked that his supplies were protected. Outside, the wind was already picking up, making a low whistling sound as it moved through the cactus spines. The storm hit like a hammer. One moment the desert was merely windy. The next, a solid wall of sand moving at incredible speed slammed across the landscape. The sound was deafening, a constant roar like standing behind a spacecraft engine. Visibility dropped to absolutely nothing as billions of sand particles filled the air. In their bunkers, the Kryn felt the first tremors of trouble. The sand was not just blowing over their positions. It was accumulating. The weight of the accumulating sand pressed down on their thermal blanket roofs, bending them inward. Thorax looked up in alarm as the ceiling of his bunker began to sag dangerously. "Reinforce the supports," he shouted to his companions, but his voice was barely audible over the storm's roar. Within minutes, the first bunker collapsed. The thermal blanket tore under the weight of the sand, and the entire structure caved in. The Kryn inside activated their emergency beacons immediately, their armor protecting them from injury but not from failure. Across the desert, other bunkers began failing in rapid succession. The Velperi domes were experiencing different problems. The force fields could handle the wind, but the constant sandblasting was draining their power cells far faster than anticipated. The generators whined as they struggled to maintain the protective barriers against the relentless assault of high-velocity sand particles. One dome flickered and died, its generator overheating. The Velperi inside had only seconds to activate her emergency beacon before the full force of the storm hit her unprotected body. Another dome failed, then another. The evacuation beacons began lighting up on the monitoring station display like warning lights. Underground, the Thanex faced an unexpected nightmare. The sand was not just blowing across the surface. It was flowing like a liquid, finding every crack and crevice. The loose desert sand began pouring into their tunnels, filling the spaces they had so carefully excavated. The first Thanex to reach the surface, choking and desperate, activated his beacon immediately. At the monitoring station, Instructor Vrel watched in grim satisfaction as the failure count climbed. 15 beacons. 20. 25. This was about normal for the first major storm. The weak were being separated from the strong, exactly as designed. "Sir," the technician called out. "The human signature is stable. No distress signals." Vrel moved closer to the screen. Tyler Harrison's biosigns showed slightly elevated heart rate, normal for stress, but nothing indicating panic or danger. His position had not changed. The cactus he had entered showed no signs of structural failure. "Zoom in on that location," Vrel ordered. The display showed the storm raging around the massive plant. The cactus was swaying in the wind, bending slightly but not breaking. Its thick, flexible structure absorbed the force of the wind rather than resisting it rigidly. The aerodynamic shape seemed to let the worst of the wind flow around it. Inside his shelter, Tyler could hear the storm's fury, but he felt remarkably safe. The cactus walls muffled the worst of the sound, and the plant's movement was gentle, almost like being in a boat on mild waves. Some sand worked its way through the entrance plug, but not enough to be dangerous. The thick walls blocked the sand-laden wind completely. He pulled out a ration bar and ate slowly, conserving his supplies. Around him, he could feel the moisture in the cactus pulp, cool against his skin. His grandmother had been right. The desert had already solved every problem. You just had to be smart enough to recognize the solutions. By the time the first storm ended 6 hours later, 32 emergency beacons had been activated. 32 cadets had failed. Rescue teams were already extracting them from collapsed bunkers, dead domes, and sand-flooded tunnels. Tyler Harrison remained inside his cactus, waiting patiently for what would come next. The first night in the desert was surprisingly peaceful after the initial storm passed. Tyler emerged from his cactus shelter to check the surrounding area. The landscape had changed completely. Dunes had shifted, creating entirely new patterns in the sand. In the distance, he could see the lights of rescue vehicles hovering over positions where cadets had failed. 15 cadets remained in the trial. Tyler checked his water supply and frowned. He had already consumed half of his allotted water, and there were still 2 days remaining. The heat and stress had made him drink more than planned. He looked at the cactus walls around him, remembering something his grandmother had taught him during a particularly dry summer in Arizona. He carefully scraped some of the inner pulp from the cactus wall, collecting it in his canteen cup. The pulp was thick and fibrous, but when he squeezed it, clear liquid dripped out. It was not pure water, but it was moisture. He tasted it cautiously. Slightly bitter but not dangerous. The cactus had been storing water for survival, and now that water could help him survive too. Tyler settled back into his shelter as the sky began to darken again. The second night was approaching, and with it, according to the briefing, would come worse storms. He sealed his entrance carefully and tried to rest. At the monitoring station, Instructor Vrel reviewed the day's statistics with the other instructors. 32 failures on the first day was actually better than average. Some years saw 40 failures in the first 12 hours. The remaining cadets have good strategies, a CRIN instructor observed. Reinforced bunkers, upgraded dome generators, deeper tunnels. They learned from the others' mistakes. The second day will test them properly, Vrel replied. The meteorology reports show the triple vortex forming right on schedule. The other instructors shifted uncomfortably. The triple vortex storm was legendary, appearing roughly once every decade when atmospheric conditions aligned perfectly. 3 separate storm systems would merge into a single massive superstorm with wind speeds that could exceed 300 kilometers per hour. It was the reason the Sandstorm trial was scheduled for this specific week. Even our best cadets struggle with the triple vortex, a Valperi instructor said quietly. Last time it appeared, only 2 cadets completed the full trial. Then we will see who among this group has true survival capability, Vrel said. Day 2 began with deceptive calm. Tyler woke to find the desert peaceful, the air still and clear. He carefully emerged from his cactus shelter to assess conditions. The twin suns were rising, painting the sand in shades of orange and red. For a moment, it was almost beautiful. His communicator crackled with the morning status report. 15 cadets remained active. No failures during the night. The report also included a meteorological update that made Tyler's stomach tighten. A major storm system was developing, expected to reach trial area by midday. Projected wind speeds, 300 kilometers per hour. Duration, 8 to 10 hours. Tyler quickly gathered the supplies he had left outside and retreated into his cactus. He used more of the removed pulp to reinforce his entrance, creating a thicker seal. Then he wedged himself into the most protected part of the hollow, bracing against the internal structure. Across the desert, the other cadets were making their own preparations. The CRIN had reinforced their bunkers with metal supports from their emergency kits. The Valperi had linked their dome generators in series, hoping combined power would hold against the increased wind. The Thanax had dug even deeper, some reaching 7 meters below the surface. The sky began to change at mid-morning. 3 distinct cloud formations were visible on the horizon, each one spiraling independently. Tyler watched through a small gap in his shelter as the formations grew closer. He had never seen anything like it, even in Earth's worst hurricanes. The monitoring station detected the merging point 30 minutes before impact. The 3 storm systems collided in a spectacular display of atmospheric violence, their combined rotation creating a vortex that stretched from the ground to the upper atmosphere. It looked like a giant drill bit made of sand and wind. All cadets be advised, Vrel's voice came over the communicators. Triple vortex storm approaching. This is your last opportunity to activate emergency beacons before communication becomes impossible. Rescue during the storm will not be available. 3 cadets immediately signaled for extraction. The smart ones, Tyler thought. They knew their limits. The storm hit with a force that made the previous day's weather seem like a gentle breeze. The sound was beyond description, a screaming howl that seemed to shake the very ground. Tyler pressed himself against the cactus's internal structure and felt the entire plant bend dramatically. For a terrifying moment he thought the cactus might uproot entirely. The plant tilted at what felt like a 45-degree angle, and Tyler slid toward the lower wall. But the cactus held. Its root system, evolved over millions of years to anchor against exactly this kind of storm, gripped the sand below. Outside, the destruction was total. The reinforced crane bunkers lasted less than an hour. The metal supports bent and snapped under forces they were never designed to handle. Emergency beacons began activating, but rescue was impossible in these conditions. The crane would have to wait, buried but protected by their armor, until the storm passed. The linked Velperi domes failed almost simultaneously. The combined generators simply could not produce enough power to maintain barriers against 300 km/h winds carrying abrasive sand. The Velperi activated their beacons and huddled in their emergency thermal blankets, waiting for rescue that could not come until the storm ended. Underground, the Thanax faced a new horror. The vibrations from the storm above were causing sand liquefaction. The normally solid sand was behaving like a fluid, and their tunnels were collapsing. They dug desperately toward the surface, emerging one by one into the nightmare storm and immediately signaling for emergency extraction. At the monitoring station, the display told a grim story. 12 beacons activated in the first hour. 13. 14. Only one biosignature remained stable and unpanicked. The human, Vrel said, staring at the screen. How is this possible? The technician pulled up detailed readings. Sir, the plant structure he is inside appears to be flexing with the wind rather than resisting it. The root system is holding. His vital signs show stress but no immediate danger. Zoom in maximum resolution, Vrel ordered. The screen showed the cactus bending and swaying in the incredible winds, but not breaking. Its thick, waxy skin was being sandblasted, but the layers were so deep that the damage was only superficial. The aerodynamic shape and flexible structure were dissipating the wind's force. Inside, Tyler was being tossed around despite his bracing, but the cactus walls protected him from the killing wind and sand. He squeezed more moisture from the pulp around him, staying hydrated despite the heat and fear. His heart was pounding and every muscle in his body was tense, but he was surviving. Hours passed. The storm seemed endless. Tyler lost track of time in the darkness of his shelter, focusing only on breathing, staying wedged in place and not panicking. He thought about his grandmother, about the lesson she had taught him. The desert provides, she had always said. You just have to know where to look. Finally, gradually, the sound began to diminish. The howling wind dropped to a roar, then to a strong blow, then to merely windy conditions. The cactus slowly straightened, returning to its normal upright position. Tyler remained still, not trusting the calm yet. At the monitoring station, Vrel stood before the display in complete silence. 14 cadets had activated emergency beacons. Rescue teams were already mobilizing to extract them once conditions permitted. One signature remained active. The human completed day 2, the technician reported, his voice showing clear disbelief. He is the only cadet still in the trial. Vrel's tail swished behind him, a sign of deep thought among his species. In 50 years of conducting the Sandstorm trial, he had never seen anything quite like this. A human, one of the newest species to join the academy, was outlasting every other cadet using nothing but a plant. Maintain close monitoring, Vrel ordered. I want to know how he survives day 3. Day 3 began with an eerie silence. Tyler woke inside his cactus shelter, his body stiff and sore from 2 days of bracing against storms. He checked his chronometer. 48 hours had passed since the trial began. 24 hours remained. He carefully removed the pulp blocking his entrance and peered outside. The desert looked like an alien world, completely transformed by the storms. Dunes had been erased and reformed. The sand had strange ripple patterns that stretched to the horizon. In the distance, he could see the wreckage of failed shelters, pieces of metal and fabric half buried in the sand. Tyler's water supply was nearly gone. He had 3 small sips remaining in his canteen. Not enough for a full day in this heat. He turned his attention to the cactus walls, looking at the pulp he had been harvesting for moisture. He needed to be more systematic about it. Using his knife, he carefully carved away a section of the fibrous inner material. The pulp came away in chunks, wet and heavy. He placed several pieces in his canteen cup and began squeezing them methodically. Clear liquid dripped out slowly, collecting at the bottom of the cup. It took nearly 20 minutes to extract enough liquid for a decent drink, but it worked. The cactus was keeping him alive. He was so focused on his water harvesting that he almost missed the movement in his peripheral vision. Something was approaching across the sand. Tyler froze, watching carefully. 6 creatures were moving toward his position, their bodies low to the ground. Each one had 6 legs that moved in a strange rippling pattern, propelling them across the sand with surprising speed. They were roughly the size of large dogs, with elongated bodies covered in sand-colored scales. Their heads were wedge-shaped and Tyler could see multiple rows of dark eyes. Sand reapers. Tyler had seen them mentioned briefly in the planet briefing. Native predators that hunted in packs. They were attracted to movement and vibration. The briefing had not mentioned what to do if encountered, probably because cadets were supposed to be in shelters, not standing outside squeezing cacti. Tyler slowly backed into his cactus entrance, moving as smoothly as possible. The sand reapers had definitely noticed something. Their heads were up, eyes scanning the area. One of them moved directly toward the cactus, its body weaving from side to side as it approached. Inside his shelter, Tyler pulled the pulp plug back into place, leaving only a tiny gap to see through. His heart was hammering in his chest. He had survived 2 days of storms only to potentially become food for desert predators. The first sand reaper reached the cactus and began circling it slowly. Tyler could hear its claws scratching against the outer skin, testing it. The creature made a low chittering sound, and the others responded, moving in to investigate. Through his small viewing gap, Tyler watched as the pack surrounded his shelter. One of them tried to bite the cactus, its jaws closing on the thick waxy skin. The long spines prevented it from getting a good grip, and the tough exterior resisted its teeth. The creature pulled back, shaking its head. Another sand reaper began digging at the base of the cactus, its claws throwing up sprays of sand. Tyler felt a moment of panic. If they undermined the root system, the whole plant might topple. But the roots ran deep, and after a few minutes of futile digging, the creature gave up. Tyler remained absolutely still. His grandmother had taught him that predators often relied on movement to identify prey. If he did not move, did not make noise, he might appear to be just part of the plant. He controlled his breathing, slow and shallow, and waited. The sand reapers continued investigating for what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes. They circled, scratched, bit, and dug, but the cactus was impenetrable. Its thick skin, designed by evolution to protect against the harsh desert environment, worked just as well against claws and teeth. Finally, one of the creatures made a different sound, a kind of sharp bark. The pack responded immediately, turning away from the cactus and moving off across the sand. Tyler watched them go, heading toward some distant target only they could sense. He waited until they were completely out of sight before allowing himself to relax. At the monitoring station, the technician replayed the footage of the sand reaper encounter. Instructor Vrel watched in silence, his scaled face unreadable. The human did not panic, observed a Kryn instructor. He remained still and let the plant's natural defenses protect him. He is using the environment as a tool, another instructor added. Not fighting against it but working with it. Vrel said nothing, but his eyes remained fixed on the screen. The human's approach was fundamentally different from how the other species had attempted the trial. The Kryn had relied on engineering and brute force. The Velperi had used technology. The Thanax had used their natural abilities. The human had done something else entirely. He had observed what already worked in this environment and simply adopted it. Tyler checked his supplies after the sand reapers left. His food was adequate. His water, thanks to the cactus, was manageable. His biggest concern now was the final storm. The briefing had warned that day 3 often brought the most sustained winds, not necessarily the strongest but the longest lasting. He reinforced his entrance again, using the last of the removable pulp to create multiple layers of sealing. He arranged his remaining supplies within easy reach and positioned himself in the most protected part of the hollow. Then he waited. The sky began to darken around midday. This time there was no dramatic buildup, no visible vortex formations. The wind simply began to increase, steady and relentless. Tyler felt the cactus begin to sway. The storm that hit was different from the previous ones. The wind speed never reached the extreme peaks of the triple vortex, but it maintained a constant brutal assault. 200 kilometers per hour, hour after hour without pause. The sound was a steady roar that filled Tyler's world completely. The cactus bent in the wind, leaning at an angle that would have terrified Tyler on day one but which he now understood was normal. The plant was designed for this. Its flexible structure and deep roots allowed it to bend without breaking, to yield without falling. Tyler wedged himself against the lower wall, bracing his legs and back to prevent sliding. The position was uncomfortable but stable. He could feel every gust of wind transmitted through the plant's structure, a constant rhythmic swaying that became almost hypnotic. Hours passed. Tyler's world narrowed to the immediate sensations of the cactus interior. The feel of the fibrous walls against his back. The sound of wind filtered through thick plant material. The slight coolness of the pulp around him. His mind drifted, thinking about home, about his grandmother, about how strange it was that lessons learned in Arizona's deserts could apply on a planet dozens of light years from Earth. He dozed occasionally, never fully sleeping but entering a kind of meditative state between waking and sleeping. His body had learned to relax even while maintaining the bracing position, conserving energy while staying secure. At the monitoring station, the hours ticked by with agonizing slowness. Instructor Vrel had remained at his post for the entire trial, watching the lone remaining signature. Other instructors came and went, but Vrel stayed, fascinated by what he was witnessing. 12 hours remaining, the technician reported. His vital signs? Vrel asked. Elevated heart rate, mild dehydration but stable. No signs of panic or distress. Sir, I think he is going to complete the trial. Vrel's tail swished thoughtfully. In 50 years he had seen thousands of cadets attempt the Sandstorm trial. He had seen incredible acts of courage, brilliant engineering and remarkable endurance. But he had never seen anything quite like this. The human was not stronger than the other species. He was not more technologically advanced. He was not naturally adapted to desert survival. But he had done something the others had not. He had looked at the desert, recognized that it had already solved its own problems, and had the humility to learn from it. The wind continued to howl outside, but inside the cactus, Tyler Harrison waited patiently for the trial to end. The final storm began to weaken as dawn approached on the third day. Tyler felt the change in the cactus's movement, the swaying becoming less dramatic, the constant roar diminishing to a strong wind. He remained in position, not trusting the calm yet. He had learned patience over the past 72 hours. His chronometer showed 5 hours remaining. The wind continued to decrease steadily, and by the time 2 hours remained, it had dropped to what Tyler would consider merely unpleasant rather than dangerous. He carefully removed the pulp seal from his entrance and looked outside. The desert was bathed in the soft light of early morning. The twin suns were just cresting the horizon, turning the sand into a sea of gold and copper. The air was clear, the storms finally exhausted. In the distance, Tyler could see a hover vehicle approaching. The recovery team. He gathered his remaining supplies and checked his condition. His lips were cracked and dry. His muscles ached from 3 days of constant tension. His hands were covered in small cuts from working with the cactus pulp. But he was alive, conscious, and able to move under his own power. Tyler crawled out of the cactus shelter and stood on shaky legs. The desert stretched endlessly around him, beautiful and terrible in equal measure. He looked back at the cactus that had protected him. The plant's outer surface was scarred from sandblasting, its waxy coating stripped away in places. But it still stood tall and firm, ready to survive the next storm and the one after that. The recovery vehicle settled onto the sand 30 meters away. The hatch opened and 3 figures emerged. Instructor Vrel led the way, his emerald scales bright in the morning sun. Behind him came 2 medical technicians carrying scanning equipment. Vrel approached Tyler slowly, his vertical pupils fixed on the human. He stopped a few meters away and looked from Tyler to the cactus and back again. For a long moment he said nothing. "Cadet Harrison," Vrel finally said, his voice carrying that familiar grinding rasp. "The trial period has concluded. You are the only cadet still active. Do you require immediate medical assistance?" Tyler shook his head. "I am dehydrated and tired, sir, but I can walk." One of the medical technicians stepped forward with a scanner. "Sir, his vital signs show moderate dehydration, minor exhaustion, and some superficial injuries. But his overall condition is stable. Better than many cadets we extracted on day 1. Vrel's eyes narrowed slightly. "Explain your survival method." Tyler gestured to the cactus. "I used the plant as a shelter, sir. I cut an entrance, hollowed out the interior, and stayed inside during the storms. The thick walls protected me from the wind and sand. The pulp provided moisture when my water ran low. The flexible structure allowed the plant to bend without breaking. "You hid inside a plant," Vrel said flatly. "I used what the desert had already engineered, sir," Tyler replied. "This cactus has survived millions of years of evolution in exactly these conditions. It seemed logical to learn from that success rather than trying to invent something new." The second medical technician was examining the cactus entrance. "Sir, this is actually quite sophisticated." He maintained the structural integrity while creating adequate living space. The seal he created for the entrance allowed airflow while blocking sand. He even harvested the pulp systematically to avoid weakening the walls. Vrel walked around the cactus, examining it from all angles. His tail swished behind him in that way that indicated deep thought. The other cadets used technology, engineering, and their natural abilities. "You used observation." "My grandmother taught me desert survival on Earth, sir," Tyler said. "She always said that the desert does not fight against the desert. It becomes part of it. These plants exist because they solved every problem the environment could create. I just recognized that those same solutions could work for me." The recovery vehicle's communicator crackled to life. "Recovery team, this is monitoring station. Confirm cadet status." Vrel activated his wrist communicator. "Cadet Tyler Harrison, human, is stable and mobile. Extracted at hour 72. He completed the trial." He paused, looking at Tyler with an expression that might have been respect. "Mark his score as 100. Perfect completion." There was a moment of silence from the communicator. "Sir, confirm that reading." "Did you say perfect completion?" "Confirmed," Vrel replied. "First perfect score in the Sandstorm trial's 50-year history." The ride back to the academy was quiet. Tyler sat in the passenger compartment, sipping water slowly while the medical technicians monitored his recovery. Through the window, he could see the wreckage of other survival attempts scattered across the desert. Collapsed bunkers. Broken dome generators. The desert had tested everyone equally and found most of them wanting. The academy's landing platform was crowded when they arrived. Word had spread quickly about the human who had completed the trial alone. Cadets from multiple species gathered to see Tyler emerge from the recovery vehicle. The other human cadets, those who had not been selected for this trial session, pushed to the front of the crowd. Tyler walked down the ramp on his own power, refusing the offered wheelchair. His legs were unsteady, but he managed. The crowd parted as Instructor Vrel led him toward the medical facility for a complete examination. That evening, after being cleared by the medical staff and given time to clean up and rest, Tyler was summoned to the main assembly hall. He entered to find it packed with cadets and instructors from all the current classes. At the front, a display screen showed footage from the trial. Instructor Vrel stood at the podium. "Cadet Harrison, please come forward." Tyler made his way through the crowd, aware of hundreds of eyes watching him. He stopped before the podium and stood at attention. "The Sandstorm trial has been conducted for 50 years, Vrel began, his voice carrying throughout the hall. "In that time, thousands of cadets have attempted it. Most fail. Some complete it with adequate scores. A few achieve excellence." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the assembled crowd. "Until today, none achieved perfection." The screen behind him showed Tyler cutting into the cactus, the methodical way he created his shelter, the storms battering the plant while he remained safe inside. "Cadet Harrison did not use the most advanced technology," Vrel continued. "He did not rely on superior physical capabilities. He did not engineer complex solutions. He did something that many of us, despite our years of training, failed to do. He observed the environment and recognized that it had already solved the problems he faced." Vrel turned to face Tyler directly. "You looked at a plant that had survived millions of years in the harshest conditions and had the wisdom to learn from it. You understood that sometimes the best solution is not to fight against nature, but to understand and work with it." The instructor reached beneath the podium and pulled out a small metal case. He opened it to reveal a medal, the Academy's highest honor for survival excellence. "Cadet Tyler Harrison, for demonstrating exceptional survival capability, innovative thinking, and perfect completion of the Sandstorm trial, I present you with this commendation." The hall erupted in applause. Cadets from species that had failed the trial, species that had considered humans too weak and primitive to deserve a place at the Academy, were clapping and cheering. Vrel pinned the medal to Tyler's uniform. Then, in a gesture that surprised everyone, the Soreen instructor placed his clawed hand on Tyler's shoulder. "You have taught us all something valuable today. Thank you." Later, after the ceremony ended and the crowds dispersed, Tyler walked through the Academy's botanical gardens. He stopped at a small plot reserved for trial commemorations. Other cadets had placed markers here, symbols of their achievements. Tyler carefully planted a small cutting he had taken from his survival cactus. It would probably not survive in this different climate and soil, but he wanted to try. He attached a small plaque to the planting site with words his grandmother had once told him. The simplest solutions often come from the harshest teachers. Nature does not waste energy fighting itself. It adapts, it endures, it survives. He stood back and looked at the small plant cutting, thinking about the massive cactus still standing in the Zarathan desert, ready for the next storm. That plant did not know it had saved a human's life. It was simply doing what millions of years of evolution had designed it to do, surviving in the only way it knew how. Tyler smiled. Sometimes, he thought, the most advanced solution was recognizing that someone else had already solved the problem. You just had to be humble enough to learn from it,